The roof of my middle school had this narrow section with windows at the very top. At some point, urban legends began to circulate that it led to a portal or a secret science lab, or just a really nice teacher's lounge. My friends and I never really believed any of them, and my personal theory was it was just a decoration like the top of a church, or those windows in Walgreens where they'd hang the sign. The school is basically a big rectangle with classrooms on either side of the hallway and a staircase at either end. There was also an elevator by the main staircase and a small basement level. As far as anyone knew, there was no way to get into that top section with the windows. The stairs only went up to the second floor, and the elevator only had buttons for the first floor, second floor, and basement. My friend Jeremy argued there had to be a way up there in case they needed to repair the roof, and that made sense, but none of us had any idea where the access point would be. That all changed one day, though. This was near the beginning of our 8th grade year, and we had a new art teacher who I'll call Mrs. B. Mrs. B was very hands-off, to put it mildly. She gave off an older, free spirit / hippie vibe, and basically let us do whatever we wanted at all times. In what I think was our 3rd art class, my friend Logan and I went into the supply closet in the back of the room to just goof around. I was surprised at how big it was, which I guess made sense given it had to hold the kiln and all those paper drying racks and other stuff. Logan and I started daring each other to grab things, and at one point he walked over and began unrolling this huge sheet of green poster paper. That's when he noticed the door. Logan called me over, and we were immediately intrigued. It had been mostly hidden behind these swinging racks that held giant rolls of poster paper. I put my hand on the knob and turned it, and to my surprise it wasn't locked. Pretty much every door in the school was locked at all times, even the doors to the classrooms if there wasn't a teacher present. Logan looked at me and said, "Yo," and I began to push it open. There was a small concrete room the size of a bathroom, which led directly to a narrow concrete staircase going upwards. I didn't want to explore it just yet, since it was near the end of class and we'd already been hanging out in the supply room for a while. Logan and I agreed to tell the rest of our friend group and plan to come back after school. As we walked out of the building at the end of the day, we met up with Jeremy and one of our other friends, Tony. After a brief discussion, we agreed to meet in the hall by the art classroom tomorrow after school. The reason we didn't try to go back up immediately was because teachers did monitor the entryway and stairwells during dismissal, and the second floor was basically off limits after school. Therefore, the 4 of us probably couldn't all make it back to the art room without getting questioned. Also, the door was likely locked, so it probably wouldn't work anyway. That's where Tony came in. He had art class at the end of the day on Wednesday, which was tomorrow, and he was planning to put a piece of tape on the part of the door that would keep it from locking. Fast forward to the next day. We all lingered in the hallway after school while trying to make it not obvious. There were lockers on both floors, so lots of kids were getting their stuff. As the crowd got thinner though, we started to worry, but then we finally saw Mrs. B come out of her room and shut the door behind her. She quickly walked down the hallway, and there were no other teachers right in that part of the building, so now was our chance. I wandered over, pretending to be trying to zip up my backpack and gently push the door handle. Tony's plan worked! A few minutes later, we were all inside and made our way to the back closet. Logan swung the rolls of poster paper out of the way, and the 4 of us stood there looking at the door. Jeremy was the most excited and pushed it open. We saw the same concrete bathroom-sized room, now lit up by the setting sun coming down the staircase. This confirmed that the stairs did in fact lead to that set of windows at the top. We decided Tony should be the lookout, since he could try the excuse that he just left something in the art room. Therefore, Jeremy and Logan and I stepped inside and started climbing the steps. We quickly reached the top, and even looking back without the excitement, it was pretty neat. There was a little crawl space about 40 feet long, whose floor was set about a foot down below the rest of the roof. There were glass windows on either side and a metal arched roof on the top, and overall it looked very futuristic. Combined with the fact we were sneaking up there after school, the whole experience was thrilling. The 3 of us started walking all the way to the end, ducking down to avoid being seen while laughing and joking. Once we got there, we looked around a bit. Since the rest of the roof extended pretty far out on each side, we couldn't see much, only some of the trees in the big front area of the school. Eventually we started heading back, but right before we got to the staircase, Jeremy shushed us. "Do you hear that?" Logan and I looked back at him, thinking he was joking, but Jeremy looked serious. A moment later we heard it too, and saw where it was coming from. In that 1-foot concrete wall section there was a vent, and coming from it was a scraping sound. It didn't seem like a regular ventilation sound, but more like someone dragging a metal box against a metal floor. The three of us bent down and squinted through the slats on the vent and saw a bunch of tiny LED lights about 10 feet away. It seemed like the vent led directly to a smaller room, which was pitch black except for whatever those lights were. However, before we could investigate further, we noticed movement and something rushed toward the vent. It was some guy's face, and a moment later he yelled "shit" very loudly. The three of us bolted down the stairs and Tony followed us without asking questions. I'm pretty sure he heard whoever that was yell at us. Logan moved the poster paper rolls back into place and we made our way quickly and quietly to the art room door. I peeked through the window and saw no one in the hallway, so we went outside and Tony removed the tape. Normally we might have waited longer to go downstairs until the teachers had all left, but each of us were terrified that guy might bust out around the corner any minute. Therefore, we just went as a group down the stairs and toward the main entrance of the school. Luckily we were early enough that there were only a few stragglers, and aside from one of our teachers telling us to hurry up, none of us got in any trouble at that moment. The next day we were all a bit uneasy, and prayed that whoever had been in that room didn't recognize us through the vent. When the morning announcements came on, my heart started racing, knowing the principal would call us out or ask for help identifying who snuck into that hallway on the roof. But he didn't. In fact, no one ever mentioned anything, and no one found out about it. Logan, Jeremy, Tony, and I all made a pact not to discuss what happened outside the four of us, and as far as I know, we all kept our word. Logan did come up with a theory, which I think was actually the most plausible explanation. The lights that we saw could have been from computers in a secret crypto mining operation. Our school did have a server room, but it was on the first floor, and as far as I know, where we were on the second floor was just classrooms and hallways. Based on how the computers were positioned, it looked like the vent led to a crawl space, which would be an ideal place to set up a secret operation. As far as who that man was, none of us got a good look at his face. I thought it might be one of the janitors, who would almost certainly have access to that part of the building, but our school had 3 main janitors and none of them seemed like the type of person who'd do something like that. Therefore, maybe it was a teacher, or even the principal. Or maybe it was someone's relative, I have no idea. Perhaps telling people what we saw would have been the right thing to do, but none of us wanted to get the group in trouble. Needless to say, we never went back into that room or hallway on the roof again, and I personally avoided going into the art closet as much as possible. But I can't help but wonder if that person was still running a crypto operation, and what he might have done if he'd caught us. I did my first 2 years at our local community college in order to save money, with plans to transfer to a 4-year university to get an engineering degree. Therefore, some of the classes I took were rather difficult, and between them and a part-time job, I couldn't really goof off. One of the really nice perks about our community college was the campus. It was beautiful. The buildings and parking lots were surrounded by fields on all sides, and beyond that was a giant nature preserve. There were miles of walking trails, creeks, rivers, and even a waterfall near the edge of campus. A lot of times I'd wander around there to de-stress. Being a young woman, I always carried pepper spray and a blunt object with me, but nothing sketchy ever happened to me on the trails. That said, something low-key terrifying did happen, though it was partly my fault. To set the scene, I took organic chemistry my second semester and bombed the first test. This was a pretty big shock for me, as I usually did well in school, and I can still remember the tears welling up in my eyes as I checked my grades from my laptop. I was sitting at a table in the student center food court area and did my best to make a discreet exit. The sliding doors opened and I stepped into the warm afternoon air, the sounds of nature surrounding me. In that moment, all I wanted to do was walk, but I also didn't want to walk the trails since I associated them with studying. Instead, I began cutting across one of the fields in a direction I'd never gone before. It was slightly uphill, and it felt good pushing myself and getting the anger and disappointment out. After a minute or two, I noticed light from the sunset reflecting off something shiny at the top. It looked like a building at first, but as I got closer it appeared to be some kind of covered walkway with a metal roof. It didn't make sense why it would be way out here away from the other campus buildings, but my curiosity helped me to put the bad grade out of my mind. Another few minutes and I reached the structure, which turned out to just be a hallway. I don't know, I'm not sure how else to describe it. It looked to be several hundred feet long, about 10 feet tall and wide, and had metal supports every 5 feet or so. The bottom was concrete, both sides were big glass windows, and the roof was metal. I cupped my hands and looked through the windows, but as far as I could tell, it was completely empty. It honestly made no sense why I was here, but there was no way I was leaving without investigating. I began walking to the right, which was back towards campus, hoping to find a door. There were only windows until I reached the very end, which was this fancy metal and glass wall with a set of double doors with those push bars. Oddly enough, there weren't any signs, like the ones outside of classrooms or on other campus buildings. Intrigued, I pushed the door, and to my surprise, it opened. I stepped inside, and it was nice and cool. It was also dead quiet except for a low hum. I looked up and saw skylights in the metal roof, along with small mechanical boxes which I imagined were part of the ventilation system. This still made absolutely no sense. I let the door close behind me, then proceeded to walk down the hallway. To my left I could see back down the hill the way I came, but to my right was an even more breathtaking view. There was a river and a little cliff, creating a waterfall. It was pretty zen, and as I walked further down, past my initial starting point on the outside, I began to relax even more. My mind also kept being blown about what this place was and why it was here. Eventually I picked up on a faint tapping sound. At first I thought it was just one of the fans, but it seemed almost deliberate. I checked behind and in front of me and saw nothing, though the hallway was so long I couldn't really see the ends. I decided to continue going forward, curiosity compelling me to go all the way down. I walked for another minute or so, and the other end came into view, but I stopped in my tracks. There, standing against the door, was a figure dressed in all black. Now, when I say figure, I don't mean like an average person. Whoever, or whatever, that was almost 9 feet tall, judging by the height of the door. I also don't know what they were wearing, whether it was a shirt and pants with a mask or a big robe. Then it hit me that the only other way out was at the other end of the hallway, and I felt myself start to panic. It didn't help that I had like zero idea what to do in this kind of a situation. Eventually I started to back up while continuing to face that person, but as if they could sense my fear, they started full on sprinting towards me. I screamed as I turned around and ran. Eventually I made it back to the door I came in at, all the while dreading the sensation of a hand grabbing me. I yanked it open, then continued to run all the way back to campus. Only when I was in sight of other people did I turn around. I couldn't see that thing anywhere, and I have no idea if it followed me. In that moment, all that counted was that I was safe. I caught my breath and walked to the campus police office since it was right nearby. I explained what just happened, and the two officers seemed to take what I said seriously and said they'd check it out. One of them escorted me to my car, and I drove myself back to my apartment. Later that night, I contemplated telling my friends and parents about what happened, but given how weird it was, I didn't know how they'd react, so I kept it to myself. I still felt bad about the chemistry test and wanted to put things out of my mind as much as possible. Over the following days, I received several emails and a follow-up phone call from the college, but apparently they didn't find anything. I began to calm down, and out of curiosity, I even asked them why the hallway was there. Oddly enough, no one knew. Apparently one of the cops that went out to investigate had no idea our campus had something like that, and the others knew it was there but didn't know why. Their best guess was it had something to do with the College of Natural Sciences or Agricultural Department and was meant to be a place where students could observe nature for their classes. Either that or it was some kind of art installation or student wellness place. I didn't press anyone for answers, and needless to say, I never went back there. I had nightmares for a week or two and never went back through the trails further away from the campus buildings, but luckily nothing else scary happened during my time at community college. I still think about this encounter randomly from time to time, not necessarily out of fear, but because it was so bizarre. Why that thing would just be waiting for someone at the end of that hallway, why that hallway was even there in the first place, is still beyond me. I just hope I never run into any situation like that again. I'm the oldest of 3 brothers, and our dad loved to take us on what he'd call adventures when we were little. Most of the time it was just us going to a park or the library or to get something from the store. We'd also frequently visit our local mall, which had this indoor play area and another store with inflatable attractions you'd have to pay to get into. On this particular day, me and my younger brother TJ went with our mom and dad to another mall, closer to where our grandparents lived. From what I remember, this one was bigger and more crowded. Our mom had to get something from a store, so our dad took us to the play area there. This one was Disney themed and it had a slide, one of those musical keyboards you could walk across, and a TV showing cartoons. TJ and I kept climbing back up the slide instead of going around and up the steps, and eventually our dad told us to stop it as we were getting in the way of other kids. He started suggesting we go on an adventure to find the mirror room, and after a few minutes he basically forced us to leave. As we began walking, our dad explained there was a room in the furniture section of one of the anchor stores that had mirrors on the wall. He'd apparently taken me and TJ there a year or two before, but since I would have been like 4 at the time, I had no memory of this. Anyway, our dad couldn't remember which anchor store it was in, so we ended up walking through all but one of them, I think. At first, TJ and I were reluctant and wanted to go back to the play area, but eventually we got excited for the adventure too. Finally, we went into the store that was ironically very close to the play area, and our dad got excited and told us the flooring looked familiar. We checked the store directory and he pointed out how the furniture section was on the upper level. The 3 of us got into the small, old elevator, which I remember had this weird pink switch between the buttons for the 1st and 2nd floor, and rode up. TJ and I started running in the direction our dad had pointed out, but quickly got distracted by this giant Christmas display. There was this big Ferris wheel and a Grinch that was in a construction vehicle that was moving up and down one of the smaller Christmas trees. We stopped for a few minutes, then our dad led us forward. Right when we should have gotten to the furniture area, the 3 of us noticed a white wall with a small wooden door in the middle. Our dad mentioned it might be undergoing renovations, so we walked back towards the center of the store and the other end. There we were greeted with what was one of the most liminal spaces I've ever seen in my life. There was this narrow hallway in the middle of a big white wall, and the sides of it were white as well. It led out into a square room with decor from the 70s. The ceiling had these fake skylights with lights behind them, tilted up at a 45-degree angle and running all the way around the walls. There was a door on one side and another smaller room on another side where a guy was sitting at the customer service desk. Our dad walked over and asked the guy if the store was getting renovated and if there was a room that had recliners in it and had mirrors on the walls. The guy apparently didn't know about that specific room, but did tell our dad that the store no longer sold any furniture and that the section was closed. After having come so far, we were all a little let down, but after stopping back by the Christmas display, we walked over into a Halloween store that had tons of those animatronics on display. There was even what I think was supposed to be a subway station and car that you could walk around in. At some point our mom finished her shopping and met us there, and overall it was a great adventure. Fast forward 13 years or so. I was a freshman in college and drove back home during winter break. TJ was a junior in high school and her baby brother Chris was a freshman. I'll skip over most of the details of our visits since they're not relevant to the story, but we all had a pretty good time. At one point, the 3rd or 4th night I was there, TJ randomly brought up that adventure in the mall when we were kids, and he and I started joking that Chris wasn't there. TJ's kind of a troublemaker sometimes and suggested we drive over and try to find that room with the mirrors, implying we should sneak in since the entire store had closed down. I was about to tell him he shouldn't when TJ told me he had keys to the service hallways since he worked part-time at one of the other stores. He told us that one of the hallways should lead right to where that furniture section was, though he never tried to go there himself. I looked at Chris, who seemed to be down, so I decided to join them. TJ had a shift 2 days from then, which was a few days before Christmas. I told our parents we were going to hang out with TJ after his shift and then drove Chris over there. We parked outside the service entrance TJ told us about, and he walked out a few minutes later. His shift ended at 10, so all the customers were gone. As the 3 of us walked back inside, I saw a fair number of employees though, and I tried telling TJ this wasn't worth losing his job over. In his usual fashion, TJ told me to stop worrying, and that it was a seasonal job anyway. He also said he knew the security guards and they were cool, and I had to admit TJ always was a charmer. We walked to this employees only section while TJ said hi to some of his coworkers and even joked with them that his older brother was back in town. No one seemed to bat an eye, so that was good. TJ unlocked the door and we stepped into this barren, industrial-type hallway. It extended as far as we could see in one direction, and he started leading us down it, talking loudly as he went. The anchor with that furniture section was at the other end, so we walked for several minutes. Luckily, we didn't run into anyone else in the hallway, though there were several security cameras, and I imagined we were being watched. Finally, we reached the end of the hallway and the door that presumably led to the service area of that anchor store. TJ reached out and touched the knob, like he wasn't sure if it would open or not. It was unlocked, and he pushed it open. We all looked inside. Unlike the hallway we just walked through, this one wasn't lit up with overhead lights, only the dim red glow of an exit sign. I started getting second thoughts, especially since our parents would blame me if we all got in trouble, but TJ stepped confidently into the darkness and started walking. I asked him what he was planning to do if the door didn't open. With a smile, he told me he'd brought his lockpicking kit. After about 30 seconds, we came to this door with a window that looked like it led to the store. Again, TJ tried the door, and surprisingly this one was open as well. I started to think that maybe he'd been here before and he was playing a prank on us. I confronted him about it, and he swore that he wasn't joking, though with TJ you never really knew. He pushed open the door to the store, which like the hallway was pitch black aside from the dim glow of those exit signs. From what we could see, the place had been completely cleared out. TJ stepped through the door, and Chris and I followed him. Our footsteps echoed off the wooden floor as we began to wander towards the center of the store. Then Chris said, "Over there," and we turned our heads. There was a soft white glow spilling out from somewhere, and a moment later I recognized it as that hallway that led to the square room with those skylights on the ceiling. We couldn't tell what the light was coming from, but we started walking towards it. We made our way through the narrow hallway, and to our surprise, the light was coming from under the door that presumably led to the furniture section. It was honestly a little creepy, as the light seemed extremely bright, not just like a regular store light. At this point I knew TJ had to be pranking us. Trying to sneak in was his idea after all. But before I could say anything, he turned the knob on the door and it opened as well. The three of us were engulfed in light and just stood there, dumbfounded. On the other side of the door was a hallway that had glass on both the sides and the ceiling. It looked like the hallway was part of a much larger room, but a moment later I realized it was only a little bit larger. About 5 feet beyond each of the glass walls were mirrors, with bright lights shining down from above. Chris and I knew this was way too elaborate for one of TJ's pranks, and TJ looked just as shocked as we did. Even if this was supposed to be part of a furniture display, there wasn't any furniture, and it made no sense why the lights would be on in this one section. I started to get a bad feeling, but TJ began walking down the hallway, and Chris followed him. I brought up the rear, trying to get a better look at what this place was. The floor inside of the hallway looked like brushed nickel, and the part of the room beyond the glass walls was bare concrete. I looked up towards the large overhead lights, but couldn't see anything above them. The place seemed very clean, which didn't make sense either. The hallway was maybe 100 feet and had a mirror at the end. I was about halfway down when Chris and TJ reached the end and screamed. They started running back towards me, and I took their cue to exit. We bolted through the door and Chris slammed it shut, and we ran all the way back through the service hallways until we got to the store where TJ worked. He stopped us and we caught our breath, then walked through his store and out to our cars. TJ got in his car while Chris got in with me, and we drove all the way back to our parents. However bizarre our adventure had just been, I was not at all prepared for what Chris told me. He said that when he and TJ reached the end of the hallway, it led to a room on one side. There stood 6 figures standing in a circle, wearing black robes and holding giant knives. But that wasn't even the most messed up part. In the middle of them and the floor was a pentagram, and what looked like an animal inside of it. By the time we got back to our parents' house, it was already 11. They had gone to sleep in their bedroom, and we tried not to wake them up as we changed and got ready for bed. TJ and Chris slept in the bunk bed, and I crashed on the couch, not before we discussed the situation for a few minutes and agreed not to let our parents know. TJ didn't have another shift until after Christmas, and I had to drive back before then. The rest of my stay was uneventful, and we all had a nice time from then onwards. I figured that's where the story would end, but apparently TJ mentioned to one of the security guards named Tony that he saw something suspicious in that store. I don't know exactly what TJ said to him, but I don't think he told Tony we snuck in. Anyway, Tony agreed to investigate and let TJ know what he found. Apparently he went to that exact hallway and walked all the way down to the end, but unlike when we were there, There were just empty concrete rooms and all the lights were off. To this day, none of us have a complete explanation for what we witnessed that night. Our main theory is that we wandered into a cult meeting by accident, but as to why they went through so much trouble to clean and decorate the hallway the way they did, we have no idea. It's also strange they were able to clear it all out so quickly, though maybe they did that part in a hurry since they knew they'd been discovered. In the end, it'll always be a mystery, and it goes to show how strangeness and danger can lurk in the most random places.